Okay, our final presentation is by Richard Anatone, professor of music theory at Prince George's Community College. He is interested in the intersection of music, media, and nostalgia, and is the editor, his kind of other research interest, of a collection entitled The Music of Nobuo Uematsu in the Final Fantasy series, a work on role-playing games and music. Please welcome Richard.
Let's begin with a widely accepted definition of nostalgia, a bittersweet longing for the past. I think most would agree that this definition could benefit greatly from further elaboration. So let's try this. A bittersweet longing for a fictional or non-fictional, experienced or imagined, individual or collective past, often idealized or romanticized. This more accurate, albeit clunky definition seems to cover all our bases when dealing with the types of past that nostalgia is generally concerned with. Now let's diagram the definition, not by identifying its grammatical structure or parts of speech, but instead by providing examples of each word within the definition. This should demonstrate the problem we're up against when trying to identify a nostalgia topic. There are simply too many variables. There are indeed infinite possibilities surrounding the past. The Middle Ages, Middle Earth, ancient Greece, reimagined Celtic histories, the so-called retro eras, the early 20th century, and of course our own individual childhood, all of which contain their own unique musical styles and characteristics. It would be a rather bold claim to suggest that all old music falls within the realm of a potential nostalgia topic. We may at least narrow our scope by examining several common topics and styles that have known nostalgic associations within media. The pastoral, the childhood topic as identified by Janet Bourne, retro styles of the 50s and the 90s, or through the 90s, and Tin Pan Alley. Assembling a list of musical tokens from these different styles is certainly a start, but we still run into problems. For example, is it logical to suggest that winds, strings, toy pianos, glockenspiels, early 20th century pop ensembles, 50s rock and roll, and electronic chip timbres are all tokens of nostalgia? As Bourne notes, a challenge to topic theory has been delineating which features and how many of them are needed for a listener to identify a topic. This seems almost impossible when so many styles are seemingly contradictory. Further complicating the matter is the personal nature of nostalgia as a human emotion. Nostalgia may be experienced individually and collectively by an individual. Nostalgia may also be experienced in tandem with or in conflict against a given narrative context. This suggests there might be purely sonic nostalgic tokens outside of the realm of narrative association. Should this be taken into consideration when identifying a musical topic? The search for a nostalgia topic is indeed a daunting task. Nevertheless, I propose a way that we might approach such a complex emotion through a nostalgia network, an interconnected web of different types of pasts and their corresponding musical styles, as well as other tokens associated with aspects of nostalgia. With this project, I hope to highlight some interesting questions surrounding this complex relationship, including, what are some of the common nostalgic tokens found in narrative media? Do these tokens induce nostalgia outside of a story? Have our own genuine music-induced nostalgic responses been conditioned through extra-musical and narrative associations? Are there purely sonic artifacts that, when detached from a narrative, can elicit a nostalgic response? And how can the intersection of music, nostalgia, and narrative media inform our understanding of music and nostalgia outside of narrative media? After providing a brief preliminary discussion on the subject matter more broadly, I address some of these questions by presenting my nostalgia network, suggesting a bifurcated approach to the topic, taking into both narrative and emotional perspectives. I identify nostalgic tokens common in contemporary media, as well as several sonic indicators of nostalgia outside of narrative association. Though I'll likely raise more questions and answers, I hope that this research will eventually lead to a better understanding of this relationship between music and nostalgia in general. Within narrative media, music topics are generally viewed as musical styles or characteristics that carry extra musical association within their context. These associations include people, places, objects, societal functions, human experiences, and emotional affects, the last of which is typically approached as an emotional state, i.e., the state of sadness. For example, one may hear the tragic style within a story without necessarily feeling an impending sense of personal grief. Instead, as music psychologist Patrick Uslan suggests, one likely perceives sadness and understands that sadness is being expressed musically. They might empathize with the drama through the music, but it would be very difficult to identify a genuine arousal of individual sadness from the music, separate from the drama, due to the syncretic nature of the media. However, nostalgia is an incredibly personal emotion. Though there's been a significant amount of research into music and nostalgia over the last several decades, here I adopt Uslan and Wastphaal's Breck-Vem model to identify ways that nostalgia may be expressed and experienced through music and media. Their model presents 7 psychological mechanisms through which music arouses emotion, organized in an evolutionary hierarchy. The 3 most pertinent to my case studies include evaluative conditioning, where emotion is induced because stimuli have been paired together in the past; contagion, where emotion is induced because the listener perceives the emotional expression of the music and then mimics the expression internally; and episodic memory, where emotion is induced because the music evokes a personal memory of a specific event in the listener's life. It should be noted that Uslan specifies nostalgia in this level of the model from his own research. I suggest that the nostalgia topic should account for both narrative and emotional experiences following the evolutionary trajectory outlined in the Breck-Vem model. Nostalgia can act as a narrative topic within the realm of perception by communicating important information of a given story, like most topics in the lexicon. Here, composers rely on an audience's conscious or subconscious familiarity with musical tokens associated with nostalgia to draw conclusions about a given story. These are often a type of style as topic, like the pastoral or tin pan alley or childhood lullabies. Nostalgia may also act as an emotional topic, eliciting genuine feelings of nostalgia within an individual unrelated to a narrative. In addition to musical styles, this can also include more abstract musical schemas as topics, including the Picardy-Plagal cadence, the Dorian shuttle, bittersweet progressions, descending chromatic bass lines, even modal mixture more broadly. These may be of particular interest to composers wishing to elicit nostalgic responses in their absolute music. So we can now assemble this nostalgia network. We begin with a central hub of individual and collective memories. From here, we branch out to 4 different types of pasts: fictional and non-fictional pasts, and the nebulous region between the two that I call fictionalized non-fictional pasts, like European high fantasies or romanticized Celtic pasts. We also have the more personal individual childhood that encompasses preschool through grade school. We can then identify musical styles commonly associated with these time periods. Interestingly, we find that pastoral and modal music are common characteristics among fictional pasts, while lullabies and nursery rhymes are common among childhood pasts. Unsurprisingly, we see more variety in non-fictional pasts, ranging from retro styles, tin pan alley, 19th century styles, even earlier. We can then identify a few musical characteristics more generally associated with elements of nostalgia. The heartstring schema, identified by Schneller and Modizanian as a bittersweet progression of a major tonic triad prolonged by a modally charged neighbor chord, and the loss gesture, as identified by Scott Murphy, as all iterations of a major 1 moving to a minor 3 type movement. Though not initially identified as nostalgic in their research, I include them here because bittersweetness and loss are inherent characteristics of nostalgia. I also include the minor 1, major 4 progression, known as the Dorian shuttle, a defining feature of the Dorian mode, which is common among high fantasy soundtracks taking place in ye olde times. From here, we can identify a few other gestures related to the 3 tokens I just mentioned. The sighing descending semitone, which is a feature of both the lost gesture and the heartstring schema, and the Picardy-Plagal cadence, which itself is a bittersweet subset of that schema. I also include the chromatic descending bass line, which is comprised of a sequence of sighs played in the bass, harmonized with different types of modally charged chords. It is interesting to note how many of these musical artifacts are byproducts of a type of modal mixture. Finally, we can organize these different tokens into categories of style, timbre, and harmonic attributes. Style is generally the easiest to identify. Employing specific styles for nostalgic purposes is akin to using a style as a leitmotif, as discussed by Ronald Rodman. A good example of this involves scenes where an important theme is played on a music box, signifying an important narrative connection to a character's past. Using style as an emotional topic is also a powerful marketing tool, drawing on an audience's own personal memories to sell products. For example, the 2014 retro-style video game Shovel Knight pays specific homage to the 80s and 90s Mega Man series and includes the same sound font from the NES classic Castlevania III: Dracula's Curse. The retro-style game is clearly marketed at older gamers who have a nostalgic connection to the 8-bit era. Using style as an emotional topic is also a powerful marketing tool, drawing on audiences' personal memories to sell products. For example, the 2014 we even see this approach in advertising products that have no relation to the style being employed at all, as seen in the Liberty Mutual advertisement from around 2020, which relies on audiences' emotional connection to the arcade and chip style of the 80s and 90s to sell their insurance.
Greetings, mortal. Your journey requires Liberty Mutual. They customized your car insurance so you only pay for what you need. Liberty Power!
Wow, that will save you lots of money.
You're insured!
This game is boring. Let's get tacos.
Timbre may also be used as a narrative token of nostalgia and may be combined with tokens associated with other musical topics to foreshadow literary events within a story. A great example of this is heard in Memories from Hitoshi Sakimoto's soundtrack to Final Fantasy Tactics, which contains timbres associated with the childhood topic: glockenspiel, flute, harp, high sustained strings. This track is a nostalgic transformation of the game's Heroes theme, which, as I have discussed elsewhere, is a tragic and lamenting trope on the heroic style. Played in the Lydian mode, Memories is heard during a scene that depicts the hero Ramza reminiscing about the past with his childhood friend Delita, who laments that he may never see his sister Titra alive again. The tragic nature of Heroes theme foreshadows Delita's eventual failure at saving his sister, while its combination with nostalgic tokens in Memories comments on the tragic nature of Ramses and Delita's doomed friendship. There's a few interesting harmonic factors that seem to contribute to nostalgic atmospheres, many of which rely on modal mixture. What's particularly interesting about these tokens is their potential to create nostalgic atmospheres separate from a narrative. As Schneller and Maldazanian suggest, the resolution of a modally charged chord to a major tonic arouse a bittersweet atmosphere and an emotional punch in its listeners. This includes progressions like the heartstring schema, the Hollywood cadence, and the Picardy-Plagal cadence. And an interesting example of this is found in Final Fantasy VII. Demetrius Chameri argues that the character themes for Tifa and Eris establish auras of nostalgia and memory through a variety of methods related to style and placement within the story. Chameri does not discuss at length these themes' harmonic identity, but it is interesting that both themes rely heavily on modally charged chords in the major mode, including the heartstring schema, Picardy-Plagal cadences, and minor dominants, in addition to different utilizations of the lost gesture. Another really interesting bittersweet progression, at least for me, includes harmonized descending chromatic bass lines found in the major mode, which are comprised of a long, continuous sigh in the bass, harmonized with minor dominants, minor four chords, even minor tonic triads, all within the realm of a major modality. These were common among popular video games in the 80s and 90s. What can be considered a harmonic counterpart to the heartstring schema is the Dorian shuttle, a minor tonic triad moving to a major four chord. While a common feature in high fantasy environments like Lord of the Rings or Octopath Traveler, I am particularly interested in its use outside of these contexts for nostalgic purposes. For an example, I turn to Community, a television comedy that aired on NBC from 2009 to 2014. The show is rich with homage to classic film, cartoons, television shows, and video games. Over the course of 2 seasons, we hear a recurring melodic gesture comprised of the Dorian shuttle and at least 6 different episodes in scenes that all depict the character's bittersweet memories, the end of innocence and simplicity, and even a hearkening back to a utopia.
Hey, can I ask you something? This is unrelated. As someone who just finished spending the majority of his life in prison, what happened with Legos? They used to be simple. Oh, come on, I know you know what I'm talking about. Legos were simple. Something happened out here while I was inside. Harry Potter Legos, Star Wars Legos, complicated kits, tiny little blocks. I mean, I'm not saying it's bad, I just want to know what happened.
I thought schools got rid of these things. Can't believe Greendale allows it.
Greendale doesn't. That's why it's hidden. Who else saw you come in?
If we say nobody, are you going to stab us with your bush scissors?
Of course not. I'm Joshua, and this is a place of peace and balance, a place of nourishment, a place free from darkness.
Because
There seems to be something about this brief gesture that suggests the nostalgic. The muted piano, high sustained pitch in the violin, and of course the modal mixture inherent within the Dorian mode. A similar timbral gesture is found in the recent teaser to the Super Mario Bros. Movie from a few years ago. We hear the iconic theme to World 1-1 in C major in the higher register of the piano, with a continued emphasis on the flattened 6th scale degree, implying a bittersweet modal mixture. And while the movie itself is a nostalgic love letter to the 80s video game, this timbral and harmonic token seem to help strengthen the nostalgic bond with the listeners.
what is this place?
Oh, I'm sorry. That one's perfectly fine. Come on, Mario!
I'd like to conclude in somewhat of an unconventional way. Over the last few years, I've been consuming a tremendous amount of video game music to find examples for a project that I'm currently working on. Soundtracks to games from the 80s to the present day. Games I never got a chance to play. Games I never even heard of. Games for systems I never knew about. And about 2 months ago, on my drive to work, I put on the soundtrack to Phantasy Star 3, Generations of Doom, an RPG from 1990 for the Sega Genesis that I never got a chance to play. Eventually, a track caught my ear. One of those tracks that you know you're going to love after the first few seconds. I was overcome with nostalgia. Nostalgia for the days playing Donkey Kong Country with my sister on snow days. Nostalgia for the evenings when my cousins and siblings would play NES after coming in from outside. Nostalgia for the days playing Mortal Kombat with my best friend slash cousin in my grandparents' basement before killing each other during Easter egg hunts. It was strange. I was overcome with nostalgia from music that I never heard, from a game I never played, for a system that I never even owned. I asked myself, how could it be? Was it the electronic timbres? Was it the descending chromatic bass line with similar harmonies from Super Mario 3? The pickety-plago motion in the B section? The pickety-plago cadence at the coda? Even now, as I read this with the music in the background, I feel nostalgic for my days back in Indiana as a pianist for a small Methodist church where I would improvise over the same exact harmonized bass line as the pastor gave his benediction. I looked at my phone and noticed that the track is titled Epilogue. A hunch told me to listen to the title music, and lo and behold, it was the same tune, same bass line, but without the muted timbres and the modally charged B section and coda. And though it's common for composers to bring the title music back to its endings, Yuhuzo Numota added a tinge of the bittersweet for the ending credits. Maybe this was done to induce nostalgia for the beginning of the story, though I doubt she anticipated it would induce such a powerful nostalgic response in someone who never even played the game nearly 35 years after composing the music. Nostalgia is indeed a hell of a drug. I welcome your thoughts and suggestions to this network that I'm currently building. Thank you.
So, questions for Richard?
Great paper.
Thank you.
Wondering if you could talk a bit about the last thing you just did there, right? And the whole way in which turning it into melodrama, like that. Also has a kind of nostalgic twist to all of it.
I miss being in drama from high school.
And I'm just kind of wondering about that gesture of the voice spoken to and over the music, and the kind of way in which that, to me, also just like nostalgic, like hit me over the head, and yeah, I'll take this anytime, that kind of thing.
I would ask you why were you nostalgic for that?
I have no idea. It happened.
Fantastic.
The interesting thing about it to me is that it's not necessarily the music, although it has to be a certain kind of music that can sit behind the dialogue. Therefore, so I think that's the kind of muting aspect of it. But there's just something about the way in which the music is there, and the way in which the voice is having to interact. It's also not having the underscore, right? Which underscore can sometimes emulate that, but the underscore is written to the dialogue. Whereas this here, you're performing to at some kind of unconscious level, if nothing else. You're responding to the gestures of the music unfolding, and I think even stronger when you have an actual melodramatic performance of live music with you speaking over it there.
Well, no, that's wonderful. Thank you. For some reason, so like when I played this back in church, like the pastor came up to me. He's like, "I'm going to do the benediction during this time. I'd like some background music." And for some reason, I was like, this is a great bass line. And I don't know what it is about it, but every time I hear a chromatic descending bass line with those cliched harmonies, like it just gives me a sense of like the past or a comfort, like a weird bittersweet comfort. And I'm right now, I shouldn't say I'm convinced because this is fairly a new project for me, but I'm really strongly considering, like, I think it has to do with the modal mixture. The psi, the half-step resolutions, the use of minor dominance, minor one chords especially, because you don't really see those as often in classical music, like the fa, mi, may bass line going to a minor 1/6. Like, I don't see that in any classical music, maybe some Chopin, possibly, but I see it all the time in Nintendo. So it's like, for me especially, it becomes nostalgic because I'm also remembering those harmonies that I experienced as a kid.
Yeah, no, I think that certainly the timbre and the there too, the way it can kind of sit behind there, and it's actually reminds me of another example there of the reverb that was put onto it, which also has a kind of nostalgic tinging to me, that a way of blending it out so that we don't get it quite totally focused.
Right, it's very muted.
Sound, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think those all play a factor in creating a nostalgic atmosphere. The warm timbres, maybe the high pitched, but again, even the piano it's muted. It's got a whole bunch of reverb on it. So,
fascinating.
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate it.
There are certainly plenty of examples of the kind of thing that you're talking about from popular media. I mean, autobiographical memory, I think about the Waltons and the way in which the older John Boy would voice over the very end of the episode and then all the good nights. So, and I'm sure there are like dozens of other examples.
I think that gets a bit more complicated because of the way in which the music and the dialogue are both recorded and so there's something about to me there's something about that live performance of voice over the top of music that has that kind of inherent nostalgic element.
Cool. Yes, and if you would, could you please come up just so that we can get the question on the.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. You had difficulty getting around the camera's kind of in the way.
Hi, Rich. Thank you for your excellent paper. This is probably going to be more of an opinion in terms of projecting into the future, because especially since we're dealing with nostalgia, it's largely retrospective. But one of the first thoughts I was trying to tackle is this idea of the role of memory. And especially with nostalgia, it's almost like we're dealing with a memory of a memory. And with this idea of tokens and establishing these connections, have you seen, or do you think there's the potential to create a false sense of nostalgia to create or manifest this sort of fake past, a la, say, a musical Mandela effect?
Are you asking if I think that there are ways in which a composer could elicit a false sense of nostalgia?
Yes.
I think so. Yeah, I mean, again, like you mentioned, like you're playing with the audience's memory, right? And so if we're looking at the musical topic through the lens of narrative and emotion, it's like, all right, well, the composer could perhaps use these more abstract ideas, harmony, timbre, bass lines, etc., and hope that it will elicit a type of nostalgia. And that's the thing, the composer might have intentions, right? But you have no idea what a person is going to feel or think or experience because you don't know their memories. So yeah, I mean, like, I think you can have the intention to do so, and I think the affect would absolutely exist, but being intentional about it, I think, would be a little bit more difficult. It is interesting. One of the things I was unable to address here because of the length of aspect of time was applying this to art music. And for me, Chopin's music, especially his nocturnes, his mazurkas, have always had this air of melancholy, bittersweet nostalgia. And he even described his own music as bittersweet. There's a Polish word, I think it's zal, I don't know if it's pronounced zal, but that's the word he used to describe his own style. And it's like, well, you consider the composer's own autobiographical nature, right? Leaving his home country, but still writing music in this, longing for probably for his past, for his youth, for better times before all the political turmoil. And so I think if we could look not only in music and media, but we could also look in music that is inherently known by audiences and the composer as bittersweet, nostalgic, and see if there's any correlating or overlapping tokens or characteristics.
But aren't most of our memories false? I mean, my understanding is that every time you retrieve a memory, you're kind of re-encoding it.
Right.
In which case, and it's subject to emotional leakage and confabulation and all sorts of ways in which it changes, such that, I mean, we hold them dear, but there's no reason to think they're real.
Well, and that's the thing, the emotions are very real.
The emotions are very real.
And so yeah, like, I mean, I would argue that some memories are probably more false than others, right? Yeah. But those memories, of the false memories, those emotions are probably as strong, if not maybe even stronger.
Yeah. One last question.
Jordan.
Oh, Jordan.
This was really, really great. My question is, so you're clearly exploring this network of gestures, which are all about kind of a field of sweetness with a hint of bitterness entering into it. But it struck me there was one example you showed us that doesn't fit that, which was the Shovel Knight example, where that music is just sweet. And I'm curious if maybe there is like a different kind of nostalgia where there isn't really, where rather than it's like experienced as something that has been lost, it's experienced as like a finding again. And the example I'm thinking of actually is from Ratatouille, when like he eats the ratatouille and it zooms in and back out, and he's just happy to be eating that ratatouille, right? He hasn't lost anything there. Is the Shovel Knight music more that kind of thing, maybe?
I think so, and thank you for, I didn't even put two and two together, realizing that's the only one that's not bittersweet, but that's also an example where I'm thinking of, if we're looking at that bifurcated, God, there's a lot of slides, holy crap. If we're looking at this, it's on the right side, right? So we're using it more as a approach, not from a narrative perspective, but we're asking the person, the viewer, to go back to happier memories. And so I wouldn't suggest that that's bittersweet. I think you're absolutely correct. That's a sweet memory, and they're going to capitalize on those sweet memories to make money. and they did. It's a fun game, let me tell you.
Well, if we could have one last round of applause. 3 great papers. So enjoyed being a part of this panel, so